This Week in Economics on the 10th of June 2018 from WBRN Radio and on the Bostonred Network. This is what traditionally we call the numbers man part of our family, the political program of Bostonred being the political part and the open source report being the technical part where we talk about open source software. And BR on the World, our international program, we will have an updated version, ongoing version of the Kim-Trump summit in Singapore, starting with the arrival of His Excellency Field Marshal And DJ Trump arrived in late of night there in Singapore. It would be a very important summit. And where does it affect the world of macroeconomics? Kind of interesting there. Well, we have global trade, and it obviously will be about global trade. And we'll jump forward to it, and then we'll backtrack to the G7 summit, which just concluded in Toronto, Canada. Very interesting situation. One of the major elements in a global economy is trade. The World Trade Organization, I recall we marched against it in Seattle before it was formed. Now it is there to supposedly deal with disputes between nations. And the whole idea of the creation of the WTO was to modernize trade between industrial capitalist nations and non-capitalist nations for that matter. This is what is going on with the summit in Singapore. The Democratic Republic of Korea is a Marxist regime, as is China, or you want to call it socialist or communist. You can play with the terms. But that goes beyond the economy, which is a planned economy in both countries, in China and in Korea. And in many other countries, the economy is more centralized. There's some debate, for instance, say India, how centralized the economy there in actuality is. But there are elements of centralization which we have in many countries. For instance, in the UK, we have the National Healthcare Service and some other items that are under government control, as in Canada, the healthcare system there. So there are elements of both and what's called market economies. But one of the problems that you have, going back to Adam Smith, a little lesson here on capitalist economics. You can talk about Adam Smith, you can talk about Milton Friedman, or any of these capitalist economists, and they'll talk about trade and so-called free trade. Now, what does the word free mean? Obviously, the ability of nations to trade amongst each other without encountering tariffs or monopolies. And you hear that 40 years ago we heard in economic classes, or classes on economics. You hear the same thing today. This talk about free markets, it's just basically propaganda. There's actually never been free markets, and there never will be free markets. But there are markets out there, and the role that markets play. On each program, we talk about the stock markets, because what has happened there, and all of this speculative and highly manipulatable. We have that in terms of macroeconomics, and that is handled in nations by the central banks. Depending on which nation you're in, central banks set interest rates for the nation. And overall, if you look at various central banks, where you go from, say, the UK to the French central bank, or the American or Canadian central bank, there are goals. And these are centralized goals in terms of employment figures. The Federal Reserve here in the U.S., which is a quasi-federal agency, But there are goals set for inflation at roughly 2%. They have a dual mandate on what's called the Humphrey-Hawkins Act, named after Senator Humphrey, late Senator Humphrey, and the late Representative Augustus Hawkins from Los Angeles. And there is a report to the Congress, the Humphrey-Hawkins hearings, and we have those reports and committees set there to entertain the report. And on the dual mandate of the Fed, financial stability and employment. That is always it, and the Fed has talked about unemployment. Their forecast at 3.8, where that was for the whole year of 2018, is where the economy is at this stage now. And, of course, inflation. You hear about the Fed meetings where they will be increasing the interest rate, usually at about 25 basis points. And that will happen, depending on whom you talk with, 2 or perhaps 3 more times this year, depending on the growth. And we'll be talking about in this broadcast some of the anecdotal information here about what happens when you have, quote-unquote, a low employment economy, which is now by standards, and where the number of people that are unemployed now, and you have to take into consideration that we're working on a 26-week scale, roughly 6-month scale, and people disappear out of those government figures. So we have people that are, say, unemployed for 12 months or 15 months or what have you, not in the figures, and getting an accurate number of the long-term unemployed is not as simple. And you add in there the so-called gig economy, the Ubers of the world, and various people. We've always had freelancers that freelanced, but now, depending on how you look at the numbers, you have many freelancers, and you also have what they term contract workers and part-time workers. So all of this is in the mix, and it does make it a bit complicated situation that you look at. Let me just go to the Globe and Mail that is in Canada, a newspaper here. A little piece, won't go into all of it, about the Democratic Republic of Korea. This person read through the Constitution and that all natural resources, railways, air transportation, airports, transportation, communication organs, and major factory enterprise and ports and banks, they are under the ownership of the nation as a whole. And this is a typical type of propaganda here, socialist paradise. Nowhere in their constitution do they talk about a socialist paradise, as long as it's dimmed in the reality that individual drive for profit is often a reliable way to extend resources and meet people's basic needs. So the author here that the Democratic Republic has become a market-driven economy. Not actually correct there. This is from Beijing. Napen van der Lippe. Anyway, this is some of the take that you have in the propaganda side of economics. Economics, of course, being one of the social sciences, has attempted to get to be more on the analytical side. We've had models around forever. Most of them don't work. But what has happened is our data, we'll call big data, has become a much more comprehensive in, say, the last 10 years. However, because of the way modern industrial capitalist economies are made up, we have a lot of numbers, but at the same time, the economy is susceptible to what is termed economic manipulation. An example of that, when you talk about the stock market, you can talk up the value of a company, or you can talk it down. During the administration of Barack Obama, you had a lot of negative press out there about the economy and the long recovery from the Depression. And yes, there was a long recovery from the Depression. Jobs were creating about the same average as they are created today. But there was much more slack, many more unemployed people, or people being made redundant. That was a matter. And the market itself was sort of up, it was sort of down, reflecting the so-called business attitude out there. And if you have a very pessimistic attitude, the so-called psychology of the economy, that is one of the items that we look to. Whereas now, much of the press, if you read the Wall Street Journal and various other elements, are attempting to talk up the economy. But at the same time, real people have a big question mark there, such as the tax cuts, how it affects them. And in a day that people don't get pay stubs and that sort of thing, and expectations. Many people are not getting the type of tax relief that they expected and will not. Small businesses, medium businesses have no idea how these laws will affect them. Part of the reason there is historically tax legislation takes a number of months and sometimes a number of years to fully be understood by the accounting community. Those are some things within the U.S. But based upon this article, the Koreans, like anyone else, are interested in getting in the development business. Now, this is something that you heard a little bit about out of Toronto, Canada, but not very much out of development. You can have jobs and virtually no development, and this is part of the problem that we have in the U.S. You have jobs with very little development in terms of sustainable development. And that is where, at a macro level, that government is involved. If government is just creating jobs, what type of jobs are they creating? They could be creating jobs in sectors that will disappear in a number of years. And that is a lot of it's happening there. The mining sector and the fossil fuel sector, that is an old hat type economy. And you look at various sectors there that are being replaced very, very quickly. That is the reason when you look at this economy, the numbers look at it in a very tenuous type of situation. Now, the other part is commodities. Commodities can be manipulated. An example of that, DJ Trump requested the Saudis to increase output given the sanctions against the Islamic Republic of Iran. Well, that is a situation where you have basically tampering with the commodities. In other words, if you increase your output, there will be more barrels of petroleum available. And if OPEC and others decide to decrease, there will be less. And of course, we have a pricing model going on there. Gasoline will cost more in the U.S. So in other words, that is a trade-off between the two. In the last of the program here, we will have the news conference of the Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau and what he had to say, and a little bit of what DJ Trump had to say on at the G7. Always at the end of these conferences, there is a communique issued by all the participants. There was one drawn up. The Prime Minister Trudeau talked about it, but DJ Trump did not sign it. He rejected it, saying that Trudeau was weak. Now, this is where economics goes into the political realm, and of course he left earlier, DJ Trump, on his way to Singapore. So the big event that you'll be seeing is Singapore, and as far as the G7 is concerned, it is history, and it was just pushed off of the newspapers. If you're not in the U.S. or Canada, you would not hear about it because the topic now is Singapore. Field Marshal arrived there early in the daylight. Trump arrived, I think, about 3 in the morning. Now, this is the Globe and Mail here. Robert Fipe writing on the 10th. And according to this, The top economic advisor lashed out at the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Sunday, accusing him of backstabbing the president, seeking to undermine the historic summit with the leader, Field Marshal Larry Kudlow, I suppose I pronounced his name, was furious after he left the G7 early on Saturday to learn that Trudeau had told a wrap-up news conference that Canada would not be pushed around by Trump and would retaliate if the U.S. Doesn't lift its steel and aluminum tariffs. And now this is a very interesting situation. Tariffs have been around for a very long time as a way of leveraging goods with any nation. Nations have tariffs, some more than others, and some goods do not get into the nations. And so that's where negotiations come in, and various trade regiments such as NAFTA, which is pretty much dead. But this whole idea of industrial capitalist countries negotiating. Now, according to Trudeau, and the NAFTA negotiations were taking a tough about retaliation with Canadian tariffs set in on July the 1st. And that would be the Canadian version of the tariffs that they declare. And this is where it gets into the political world with Trump is not going to let the Canadian Prime Minister push him around. He's not going to permit any show of weakness on the trip to negotiate with North Korea. Kim must not see American weakness. Well, the whole situation is this. The Prime Minister held his communique that went worldwide. The leader, Kim, the field marshal, sees it. He knows how to watch CNN. He does international news programs. So he has that. Whether or not the weakness or not, who knows? But basically, the Washington Post talking about this just basically said the G7 meeting in Toronto was sabotage. Nothing came out of it, because if you don't have a joint communique, you accomplish nothing, even though the communique said very, very little. But they did talk about such things as inequality, the Prime Minister Trudeau, and the situation of girls and women. So they had some positive things coming out of there. So when Trump walked away, being the quote-unquote largest economy of the G7, that was the end of that ball game. They'll have to have another meeting. And at one time they will also be G8. That include the Russian Federation. Trump wants a Russian Federation back. So there are a lot of political things going on here that are not in the economic sphere, which is a little bit different when we look at those. And let's see, we'll have to... Oops. And let's see where we start here. Well, okay, never mind. We don't need to be there. Let's... we'll go to CNBC. This is from the Atlanta Fed. We talked about the Atlanta Fed in the previous programs. The Atlanta Fed's forecast of a 4.6% GDP growth. That's in Q2. If the outlook is correct, be double the full 2007 rate, and well above the 3.1% increase in the same period a year ago. DJ Trump, while campaigning, pledged 6%. Well, that was just a campaign pledge. The U.S. economy is heating up as the year progressed, with the second quarter pointing towards growth that Trump predicted. In recent forecast, the Atlanta Fed said that the 3-month period is tracking at 4.6 gain, exactly double, well above the 2.2% in Q1. Well, basically what you see here, in other words, if you have 2.2% in Q1, and if the accurate growth rate would outdistance the 3.1% gain in 2017. Well, looking at this, you would have a point above that, and if you went into a 4.6%, would it be an outliner? It would be an outliner in that sense. Period. Other factors indicate a strong growth as well, though the central bank's ticker is optimistic. Now, the CNN rapid update, we'll look at the reading from top economists on Q1 at a healthy 3.7. The New York Fed's nowcast is tracking a more muted 3.1% there. I don't know. We'll take a look at this. The different Feds, of course, what's happening here, they're using different models to accomplish this. We'll look at these. We'll get a lot of clarity. The rapid update model offers a new measurement for how an economic report changes an outlook on Wall Street for U.S. growth. That impacts the domestic products, Moody's Analytics, and CNN. Now, this is updated on the 6th of June. Q2, the medium forecast here is 2.3, and that was in Q1. In Q2 at 3.7, a low and high estimate of 3.4 to 3.7. The average would be about 3.7. Now, this is the update, and we look at some other vertical sales. We don't have that information in yet, so we look at some of it, but it's not there as of yet. And I don't think we'll put this in. Anyway, this is the rapid update look. This is from Moody's and CNBC. Now we go to the now casting a report. We have to get it here. I have it in just a second. This is the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And we're still loading up things here. Okay, we finally, I think, have the information here. Import goods and services, a negative 0.13, and import goods and services. Okay. Anyway, and I will get very much out of that particular situation, but nonetheless, the Fed stands at 3.1 for Q2. Is where they stand, and Q3 at 2.9. Normally, it's interesting. Normally, Q2 being a breakout quarter will normally be your better quarter, but that depends on a few things. Now, we want now GDP. Now, this is out of the Atlanta Fed. Is not an official forecast of the Atlanta Fed. Rather, it is the best view as a running estimate of real GDP growth for the current measured quarter. Now, that said, and it was not said in the article, so we're getting some things mixed up here. Recent forecast for GDP now. Models are available here. And we may append this on there for extensive numerical data, including underlying source data forecasts and model parameters. and that's on a separate spreadsheet. And nonetheless, GDP Now model estimates a real GDP growth, seasonally adjusted annual rate in Q2 at 4.1%. That was on May 16th, on change from May 15th, an increase in the nowcast of the second quarter real private fixed investment growth from 5.2 to 5.9%. After a new residential construction released. That was by the Bureau this morning. And second quarter real GDP growth from 0.81% to 0.72%. That's the inventory investments there. And this is some of what is going on here. And this is... some explanation of it. We'll put this on our Twitter feed and on the Cranston Analytics, which is our sponsor here, site. So we'll get this on several sites. We'll need to. I thought we had that. I guess we didn't. Anyway. This is GDP Now. We'll make sure that we understand where we are. Anyway, this was May 16th. And we'll get this up on Twitter. Our Twitter feed here. And various others. So that's the story in Atlanta, Georgia. Back to CNBC. Jobless claims. A total of 222,000 versus 225,000 were expected. These are the jobless claims. Now, this is on the 7th of June. Number of people filing for unemployment benefits unexpectedly fell. The robust labor market and firming inflation have a cemented expectation the Fed will, of course, raise interest rate. Now, that meeting is on the 12th through 15th, a policy meeting that they will have. And these are the numbers. Economists at Reuters had forecast claims at 225,000 in the last week. Labor market is considered to be closer at full non-farm payroll. It increased 223,000 in May. The unemployment rate, of course, dropped to an 18-year low at 3.8%. That is where the Fed had pinpointed that it would be at the end of the year. Layoffs have remained at very low, signs of growing worker shortages across the country. The data on Tuesday showed there were a record 6.7 million job openings in April. The number of unemployed persons per vacancy slipped to 9/10 from 1 in March. So some of the things that are happening here, the claims report showed the number of people receiving benefits increased, 21,000 to 1.74 million in the week ending May 26. The 4-week moving average is so-called continual claims dropped 13,250 to 1.73 million, the lowest since December of 1973. That's historic because the economy in that year was much smaller than it is today. So one of the things that we continually look at in terms of where the unemployment figures are. Let me just move along here over to Bloomberg. And this is from Bloomberg, on June 6th, David Wealthy in Shayola country is out of workers and dangling 100% pay hikes. This happens in some places, Midland, Texas here. Jerry Morales is being whipsawed by a local boom there in the Premier Basin. The region saving time, sales tax revenue is hitting a record high, allowing the city to get around to fixing roads and the things that they need to fix. Below 2.1 unemployment rate is a bear, and is a proprietor of Mulberry Cafe and the Gerardo Castor Morales is working hard to retain cooks. As a Republican first elected, he oversees a government payroll of 200 workers. The economy is on fire, he said, and from the back table at the cafe the other day, watching the lunchtime crowd line up at various places. Fire, of course, can be dangerous in a country's busiest oil patch, where recount has climbed by nearly 1/3 the past year. Drillers and service providers, etc., etc. So many bus drivers with Echta County Independent District in nearby Odessa quit to go to the oil fields. And that kids were sometimes late to class. I mean, bus drivers, they're all chasing the shale. Anyway, the industry has a furious appetite for workers and to hire just about anyone with some basic skills. There, 2 week, this person here, Jasmine Jimenez, 24, zipped through a 2-week training program at New Mexico Junior College in Hobbs, New Mexico, about 100 miles from Midland, and was hired by Chevron as a well pump checker. Honestly, I never thought I'd be in an oil field. Well, he's there now, and he's making a decent salary. No basic 15 now. He's getting 20. Or she is Jasmine. Sorry about that. She's getting $28 an hour. Is double what she was earning until December as a guard at the Lee County Correctional Facility in Hobbs, New Mexico. Now, this is one of the things in these very small towns. People guard, so she's making roughly $14 an hour there, which is probably pretty good for Hobbs. And now she's making double that. And how long will it go on? Well, it'll be interesting to see. Few months to a year there. Companies are the most cost conscious than ever. The evolution of oilfield technology continues to make finding and quickly and producing oil quicker and cheaper in the pancake layers of the rocks. That is what it's all about. And this so-called shale oil accounts for 30% of the oil output. Now it's 75,000 square miles in West Texas, in southeast New Mexico. Midland was so year-over-year increase of at least 34% in sales tax collection each of the last 4 months. Morales said the coffers are full enough, but he may ask for a raise for city workers. So in this, in other words, can happen. The supply of homes for sale is the lowest on record. That's in a lot of districts. That's according to Texas A&M Real Estate Center. The average price being $440,000 in Midland is the highest since June of 2014, the last time the world saw oil above $100 a barrel. Apartments rent in Midland, Odessa is up more than a third over the average last year. At 863 square foot unit, commanding $1,272 a month. So in other words, it's way up. They saw the same thing in North Dakota. And now many of the workers have left, a different kind of situation there. Midland Odessa, of course, have been in this business forever. The Midland College oil and gas program, which trains for a position like petroleum energy technician, enrollment is down about 20% from last year, but the school that teaches how to pass the test for commercial driver's license are packed. So there were a lot of hauling jobs there. And Jeremiah Fleming, 30, is on track to pull down $140,000 driving a flatbed truck. So basically what happens when workers command these types of salaries, that many of them obviously have been making less than $40,000 a year, $30,000, $25,000, whatever, are all of a sudden pushed into these jobs for months and sometimes years, but usually not over 2 or 3 years, and sometimes less than that. So it's Morales is a native school of a Midlander, and G.W. Bush was from Midland, Texas. Anyway, the second generation of restaurateur, it says seeing it happen before. The prices go up, and the energy companies, and of course it goes down. People complain about poor services, long lines at Mickey D's, Walmart, and their favorite Tex-Mex joints. Rents soar has been the story of the boom and the burst, and this is one of the problems that it translates into a national problem. If you look at Midland, Odessa, those areas that jobs boom in, unemployment is low. The difference there is the wages are actually going up because of demand for workers. In many parts of the U.S., where you have 3.8 unemployment nationally, wages have not really went up, except for the concessions of the Walmarts of the world, and some made that they raised $1 of a rate. I was talking to a lady that works at a Walmart, I think she still does, was saying that, well, the workload increased, although they got $1 raise there, and some medical benefits. That was from a year ago. So, no doubt the protests for 15 has had some tangible results. But most of the cities where there have been wins are talking about putting the $15 an hour rate in 2021 and 2022. So that's where you have very uneven developments in a capitalist system in Midland, Texas, and the Permian Basin is one example of what goes on. We could look at North Dakota and some places like that. It was the same situation at $140. This even translates to the conflict in Baghdad, Iraq, that you had people going there to drive trucks for these extraordinary themes. Let's do, well, wait a minute, hold this minute here. We've already looked at that. This is from Bloomberg. Also, allies with free trade proclamation. Well, none of that happened. The International Monetary Fund was there, and all of those people were there, but it just was not realized, period. I think it's interesting to look at this one from Bloomberg. While we are here, Citigroup sees oil forcing up inflation faster than historically happening. The recent surge in the price of oil report to its clients on a Friday. We like to get these. Preneller Hindenburg estimates a 10% rise in crude oil prices would lift the headline inflation about a quarter point. We've seen this before in the U.S. and Euro zone by 0.21% in the U.K. over a year. The upside surplus, could be much as 0.2% higher than what markets expect. The Brent crude price, we hadn't looked at that, has risen 20% in the past 3 months to around 77 cents a barrel. We'll look at the actual price. May force up inflation faster than typically. Well, this is a big argument here, and for those who do real-time economics, we see this as happening. Inflation, usually when it is growing, does grow at a faster rate than most models predict. And part of the reason there is from the model to actually what is happening on the ground, the psychology of the market. But what we have here is a number of things we did not have in the past, is the manipulation of commodity prices. OPEC has over the years limited production, but now you have this shale oil enterprise in the U.S. and also another factor, the U.S. Importing a petroleum product worldwide. This had not happened. The U.S. did not import petroleum products like liquefied gas, etc., to Europe and other places. So in other words, you have upheavals in traditional markets. Let's say OPEC or Brent crude out of the North Sea. We're covering those markets. Now there are other players in there. And that historically had not been the case. So you can expect this to happen. And also it sort of translates into, in some locations, a boom-bust cycle. And this is where it's dangerous. Like you have in Midland, Odessa, Texas. Prices go up. People are trying to get certificates to drive trucks. And they do have trucks there, and they're trying to get workers there to do it. So we'll monitor this development, very important development here, and where petroleum prices go. Petroleum prices are a big part of what is going on. We'll do the stocks here first. This comes from Bloomberg. We've had to make some changes. We'll start off in Asia. The Nikkei was down 1.76. Hang Seng negative 554.42. All the markets were down. And let's see, where else are we going here? The CSI was also down 51.39. And let's see if we can get the Asia Pacific. The FTSE was down 23.33. The DAC was down 45.40. And in France, they were at 1.86. And the IBEC was down 82.70. We usually use the BBC. We had to sort of move around a bit here. And we look at the Dow was 75.12. The NASDAQ at 10.44. And the NASDAQ Composite at 43.47. And let's look at the commodities. We used to call it do the numbers. The Bloomberg Commodity Index down 0.13. And the Reuters Jeffers at 0.58. The oil energy index, the latest, crude oil has indeed went down. This is on the contract for July, and 6/8 what we have here, down 21 cents at $65.74. This is West Texas crude. Sorry about that. And now the Brent crude, let's see, was down 86 cents at $76.46. The gasoline index here was up 5 cents. And natural gas was down 4 cents. Home heating, we don't hear about that anyway. 1.56, that's where it was down. Gold, here, let's see, down 30 cents at $1,302.70. The spot was up 98 cents at $1,298.16. Silver was down 7 cents at $16.24. Platinum was up $7.68 at $907 and 0.37. The agricultural index is here. Corn was up $1.50, 377 and 0.75. Cocoa was up $101 there. And live cattle, we're not always looking for pork bellies. Anyway, at 1.53. So that is where our commodities stood. Let's see what else we have on the... This is out of Reuters. The force big companies to publish workers to boss pay gaps. That's interesting. It will, from 2020, legally be required to publish that. That is in the UK. They will set these new laws out in Parliament on a Monday. The new laws, which are subject to parliamentary approval, are part of the government industrial strategy, will take effect in 2019, a long ways away there. And basic election there, that is still up in the air. What will the Parliament in the UK do about Brexit, whether it will become what it should become or it will not become? And that in itself is period. And just one last check at Reuters here. If anything is new is happening. Again, this is a situation in Canada is the big item, and at the same time the Canadians want to compromise. Well, this situation is a political situation, so very, very difficult to say where that will end up with the G7 and where the G7 will go. Trump basically abandoned them, left town, and that was sort of the end of that situation there. A very turbulent kind of situation. And a lot of back and forth. We'll get. This is from CNBC. Companies have no choice now but to raise wages, is what they are talking about here. The U.S. economy is running at close to capacity. This is the 3.8%, despite the 2.7% year-over-year. Current reading of this gain falls short of close to 4% normal increase seen historic during periods of low unemployment. That suggests it might be worth exploring whether specific structural changes today might persist in the future to hold down income growth below 3% annually. Studies have carefully examined how labor is less unionized. That is one of the big problems that limits bargaining power, is less interested in moving geographically, is less productive somehow, maybe it. It may be that 3+ hours a day starting on our mobile phones, including a larger pool of workers sitting on the sideline who are technically not workforce participants since they are not officially seeking jobs. Now, this is some of what is going on here. Many contribute to wage stagnation. inhibiting the traditional response of higher pay to shortage of workers. However, the last point suggesting that the real unemployment rate has been higher than official. This is talked about on the political side during the 2016 campaign. Officially stated best explanation is why employers have not needed to offer much higher wages to induce new workers in many sectors. It's also clear that the private sector cannot blame weak profits for lack of wage growth on its employees. The chart below, we won't get into that one, but basically top wages account for 57% of total revenue today compared to 65% in 1975. While the U.S. economy has expanded over the past decades, the portion earmarked for workers has declined. One group has defined that trend as CEOs. The CEO of the 300 top corporations in America have skyrocketed, with the average CEO earning 30 times the salary of a typical worker, versus half rising at 271 times today. These firms were represented over the entire domestic workforce. However, the S&P 500 block of companies now only account, and this is very interesting here, 17% of domestic workers, with the majority work by small to medium-sized entities. That explains why the average real salary increase for non-supervisory workers over the past decade, plus 0.8%, exceeded that for total worker pool, plus 6%, including managers. While the numbers are high at the biggest companies, their impact in the total labor market is indeed small. This is something that is usually not said as much. It's possible there are other cost categories that have grown dramatically at the expense of earnings and might continue to crowd out workers, considering healthcare insurance premiums, which have combined for 5.5% of total private industry compensation in 1997. It's now 7.6%. I'd venture it's much more than that. It is more than that, I should say. The Bureau of Labor Statistics announced that its monthly wage growth, healthcare premiums, and benefits are excluded from those numbers. At my company, we pay approximately $25,000 a year for each worker who has a family plan. Our premiums have expanded at the rate of 2 to 3 times of inflation. Now, if you are paying $25,000 a year for insurance, there's a case for single payer. It's possible that the increased benefit package, such as health care, flex time, parental leave, which are not included in wages, could be causing wage stagnation. That's quite possible. And finally, I looked at Human Resource Department spending in an effort to quantify whether programs that relate to harassment, education, training, and safety policies might be so expensive that wage growth are casualty. Despite the high-profile nature of HR initiatives, the wake of Me Too movement, HR staffing currently represents 1.4 full-time equivalent for every 100 workers, up slightly from the prior 5 years. Staffing, of course, is not a perfect proxy. And this is Karen Firestone. She is chairman and CEO of Arrears Asset Management. I have no idea. Arenas Asset Management. Anyway, therefore, I conclude that the ambiguous help wanted signs, see multiple storefronts and restaurants, and articles about industries such as trucking, airlines, nursing, and IT will force employers to face with a labor shortage to ultimately pay more. After the recession, millions of people who lost their jobs became self-employed or unemployed. Uber drivers, personal trainers, dog walkers, forgot about them, home relocation experts. No doubt of the types of things that people do have indeed changed. Let me just check the time out. Oh, we're there. Nonetheless, this will do it for one more week of This Week in Economics, brought to you by Cranston Analytics. Remember us. We find on Facebook at Cranston Analytics, and on Twitter as Economics 2010. Why we're 2010? Well, we put it up in 2010, and it has stayed there, and it's been the home of Numbers Man, our financial program, and we tweet financial matters there and other matters. A small audience, but quite a few tweets out there for us. We'll, of course, talk to you next week. For those in business, keep your eye on the... let me start this over again. For those in business, make it a productive week. I was so much thinking about consumers here. For consumers, keep your eye on the prize. And how all of this will reach ordinary people. Well, inflation will affect many things, including mortgages. We think of, in essence, mortgages more so than anything else. But it does take a little while to, as they say, filter through the economy. Now, in terms of homes, you are having in some locations picked up building in a single family. And also in apartments, not enough. One of the big problems in the U.S. is you don't really have a national housing program. You really don't have regional housing programs. You have, in places like Houston, various other places, little or no urban planning, so you have sprawl. Things are just all over the place. So what has happened in those areas, particularly in California, pockets of California, you're running out of land. So you have to tear houses down and replace houses. The whole housing market itself is tenuous as the median price for houses go up, whereas the starter houses, there are very, very few of those. And of housing in particular, there's never been a targeted national housing program to build housing. If there were one implemented during the Reagan administration, the homeless problem in this country would have been no more, because not only would the homeless been eliminated in the 80s, a constant building program would have kept up with where the homeless are, because the homeless are just being displaced many times by their apartments or whatever being demolished or converted over to more expensive places to live. That is in essence what is going on. Now certainly, yes, there are people that have all kinds of issues forced into the street, but for the first time you see elderly people forced into homelessness because they simply could not afford where they lived, whether it be flats or whether their homes, the taxes became more than they could afford, or there are not enough elderly places for them to go to. Have a good week, everyone. We'll talk to you next week.
Seems to have the experience of the legendary hospitality of the people of this region, and that's exactly what I've seen in the last few days. Thank you to all the members of the community, to those who played a role locally, to the team of the Manoir Richelieu, government representatives, and to all Canadians who played a role in this summit running well. Finally, thank you to the autochthonous indigenous communities with whom we work closely throughout this process.
Very successful G7 summit here in Charlevoix. This summit was focused on addressing very real, universal challenges and finding lasting solutions that will make a difference in the lives of people. And I'm happy to announce that we've released a joint communiqué by all 7 countries. Je suis très content d'annoncer.
I'm very happy to announce that we have a communiqué from all 7 countries.
Our conversations took place against the backdrop of a rapidly changing economy and growing middle-class anxieties around rising inequality, automation, and equality of opportunity. Anxieties that have eroded trust in our institutions' abilities to deliver for working people. Ahead of the summit, Canada laid out 5 broad themes to help us tackle the root cause of this central economic issue that we all share. We talked about investing in growth that works for everyone and preparing people for the jobs of the future. We reaffirmed our commitment to advance gender equality and work together on climate change, oceans, and clean energy. We spoke of the need to defend our democracies against foreign threats and build a more peaceful and secure world. We are committed to take concrete action to defend our democratic systems from foreign threats and take coordinated action to identify and hold to account those who would do us harm. Now, there is, of course, a diversity of opinions when it comes to charting the path forward. Every leader comes to the table with a different and at times divergent view on the preferred course of action. But leaders arrived here in Charlevoix ready to roll up their sleeves and get to work. And that's exactly what we were able to do. Now, I know you'll know that we had some strong, firm conversations on trade and specifically American tariffs. I reiterated to President Trump that these tariffs threaten to harm industry and workers on both sides of our border. I stand ready to work closely with the President to resolve this dispute swiftly, but as I have consistently said, I will always protect Canadian workers and Canadian interests. We've also made good, genuine progress on a large range of issues over the course of the last few days. So there's a lot that we could cover here, but let me just highlight a few key accomplishments.
We first of all set up the Advisory Council on Gender Equality, whose mandate is to integrate gender equality into the different subjects, activities, and results of this summit.
Nous espérons que le G7 de Charlevoix marquera le début d'une nouvelle tradition qui fait de l'égalité des sexes
which makes gender equality one of its major priorities. France, who will follow us in the presidency next year, has confirmed to us that they will go on with this approach and with this fight. In Canada, as throughout the world, growth of the economy, which has been observed in the last decades, is largely attributable to women who went onto the labor market and transformed it. So if we really want to fight against chronic weak economic growth, the income gap and social inequalities, to truly achieve gender equality, that must be part of our objectives, just as the economy or the environment are. And that's exactly what we have done during this summit.
And today, I'm thrilled to announce that Canada, along with the European Union, Germany, Japan, the United Kingdom, France, and the World Bank, will invest nearly $4 billion to support quality education for women and girls living in crisis, conflict-affected, and fragile states. This funding represents the single largest investment of its kind. In the fight for greater equality, education is key. It gives girls the tools they need to make their own decisions about their future and live the life they want for themselves. When women and girls have an equal chance to learn, grow, and succeed, entire communities benefit. I believe this historic investment in girls' education further speaks to our common resolve to make gender equality a top priority not just this year, but every year. We also welcome the announcement made by the development finance institutions of all G7 nations that they will be investing considerable funds focused on women in developing countries to enhance economic participation and empowerment. This is proof of what we can accomplish by working together. 5 of us also agreed to a plastics charter, which speaks to our common resolve to eradicate plastic pollution. This is an important step towards achieving a life cycle economy in which all plastics would be recycled and repurposed. This is good news not only for the environment, but also for businesses who could stand to benefit from reducing the cost associated to plastic use. Canada will also invest $100 million to rid our oceans of the global plastic pollution. To protect our oceans, we agreed to the G7 Blueprint for Healthy Oceans and Resilient Coastal Communities. Oftentimes, developing nations, including small island states, are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of a changing climate. G7 nations have a role to play in helping these countries mitigate the consequences of and join the fight against climate change, which goes hand in hand with the health of our coasts and oceans. As part of this initiative, Canada will invest $162 million to help build strong and resilient coasts and communities. This will include efforts to build back better after extreme weather events and to help expand renewable energy infrastructure. And finally, we spoke about the future of the economy at length. Innovation is changing how we live and how we work, which brings new challenges and opportunities for working people. One thing that came out of this year's summit was the need to encourage a culture of lifelong learning so that the next job is also a better job. We also recognize that we need to adopt new ways of measuring economic growth. If we want to build economies that work for everyone, it's essential we develop the right tools to monitor progress and address some of the flaws of our current approach. Mes chers amis,
my dear friends, the Leaders' Summit is coming to a close, but Canada's presidency will go on until the end of the year. Over the last few days, leaders made 7 commitments, which we call the Charleroi commitments, which are added to the communiqué, which covers a whole variety of subjects. We intend to continue the momentum we have achieved over the last few days and the progress that have been made up until now. At a time which is defined by the uncertainty which our world has to deal with, meetings like this will take on ever greater importance. They give us the opportunity to join forces and sometimes to settle our disputes. Facing the great challenges we have today, countries which have up until now had great economic success need to show a common front and promote the values that are at the very root of our success. I will leave the summit inspired by the discussions in which I participated and as convinced as ever of the need to work together to meet our common challenges. Once again, thank you for having been here in Charlevoix. And I'll be very happy to answer your questions.
Cochrane, please.
Hi, Prime Minister. Hi there, Prime Minister. I'm wondering if you can answer this in English and in French. We have not yet seen the communiqué, but we're told by credible sources such as Chancellor Merkel that you have reached compromise language on trade and tariffs in this. I'm wondering, though, if you can square that with the comments that President Trump made as he was leaving, that the U.S. has been taken advantage of for decades. We are like the piggy bank that everybody is robbing and that ends, and 2 specific threats that it has to stop or we will stop trading with them being people who don't ally their trade practices with U.S. interests, and warning that if you retaliate against steel and aluminum tariffs, you'll be making a mistake. So my question is, how meaningful is this consensus if the President is making these kinds of threats on his way out of town?
The President will continue to say what he says at various occasions. What we did this weekend was come together, roll up our sleeves, and figure out consensus language that we could all agree to on a broad range of issues, whether it's making an economy that works for everyone, ensuring the inclusion of women and girls, being bold on protecting our environment, or moving forward in a meaningful way to prepare for the jobs of the future. These are the kinds of things that are common challenges across our countries and around the world, where anxiety about economic prospects of individuals and particularly of their kids leads to unpredictability and sometimes political uncertainty. We have come together to lay out where we agree, to highlight the need to continue to work together to serve the citizens who've elected us. I'm very pleased we came together on an ambitious joint communiqué at the end of this Charlevoix summit. Évidemment, le président va continuer.
Obviously, the President will continue to say what he says. But what we've achieved this weekend, together, the 7 of us, was to gather together around an ambitious communiqué, setting out the shared challenges we have to support our middle classes, to continue to support our citizens, and to combat the anxiety and uncertainty that often goes hand in hand with fear about their pensionable age, the future of their children. So we've been looking at jobs for the future and concern about global security, economic growth that works for everyone, women, the environment. All of these discussions highlight the value of working together, of aligning ourselves with each other and continuing to support a system which has constituted a major success for many people.
I highlighted directly to the President that Canadians did not take it lightly, that the United States has moved forward with significant tariffs on our steel and aluminum industry, particularly did not take lightly the fact that it's based on a national security reason, that for Canadians who either themselves or whose parents or community members have stood shoulder to shoulder with American soldiers in far-off lands and conflicts from the First World War onwards, that it's kind of insulting. And I highlighted that it was not helping in our renegotiation of NAFTA, and that it would be with regret, but it would be with absolute certainty and firmness that we move forward with retaliatory measures on July 1st, applying equivalent tariffs to the ones that the Americans have unjustly applied to us. I have made it very clear to the President that it is not something we relish doing, but it is something that we absolutely will do, because Canadians were polite, we're reasonable, but we also will not be pushed around.
En français.
J'ai souligné au président
I pointed out to the President the extent to which, for Canadians throughout this country, this is an offence. It's an imposition of tariffs on steel and aluminium, claiming a rationale of national security. But over our history, Americans and Canadians have so often stood shoulder to shoulder to defend the values that we both appreciate. I pointed out with regret that we would take that decision, but if the President continued to impose unfair tariff barriers on our steel and aluminum, then we would respond firmly and without any hesitation as of the 1st of July to impose equivalent tariffs. We were firm, we are polite and courteous, but we shall not be pushed around by others. We are Canadians. Radio Canada. Did Donald Trump eclipse your summit? Were you saying, wow, we managed to survive Donald Trump again? Prime Minister, well, that was the approach that some people took in the run-up to the summit. But here we are. We have a unanimously supported communiqué, strong commitments which are quite specific about the actions we're going to take, the major challenges facing not just Canadians and G7 citizens, but citizens around the world.
The America's closest allies were frustrated with you and angry with you, and that you were angry with them, and that you were leaving here early to go meet for more friendlier talks with Kim Jong-un in Singapore. And I'm wondering if you view it the same way, and do you view the U.S. alliance system shifting under your presidency away?
Who are you with, out of curiosity?
CNN.
I figured. Fake news, CNN. The worst. But, I could tell by the question. I have no idea you're with CNN after the question. I was just curious as to who you're with. You're with CNN. I would say that the level of relationship is a 10. We have a great relationship. Angela and Emmanuel and Justin, I would say the relationship is a 10. And I don't blame them. I blame, as I said, I blame our past leaders for allowing this to happen. There was no reason this should happen. There's no reason that we should have big trade deficits with virtually every country in the world. I'm going long beyond the G7. There's no reason for this. It's the fault of the people that preceded me. And I'm not just saying President Obama. I'm going back a long way. You can go back 50 years, frankly. It just got worse and worse and worse. You know, we used to be a nation that was unbelievably cash flow oriented, had no debt of any consequence, and they'd build the highway system. We built the interstate system virtually out of cash flow. And it was a lot different. No, we have a very good relationship, and I don't blame these people, but I will blame them if they don't act smart and do what they have to do, because they have no choice. I'll be honest with you, they have no choice. They're either going to make the trades fair, because our farmers have been hurt. You look at our farmers, for 15 years, the graph is going just like this, down. Our farmers have been hurt. Our workers have been hurt. Our companies have moved out and moved to Mexico and other countries, including Canada. Now, we are going to fix that situation. And if it's not fixed, we're not going to deal with these countries. But the relationship that I've had is great. So you can tell that to your fake friends at CNN. The relationship that I've had with the people, the leaders of these countries has been, I would really rate it on a scale of 0 to 10, I would rate it a 10. That doesn't mean I agree with what they're doing, and they know very well that I don't. So we're negotiating very hard tariffs and barriers. As an example, the European Union is brutal to the United States. They don't take, and they understand that, they know it. When I'm telling them, they're smiling at me. You know, it's like the gig is up. It's like the gig is up. They're not trying to, there's nothing they can say. They can't believe they got away with it. Canada can't believe it got away with it. Mexico. We have a $100 billion trade deficit with Mexico, and that doesn't include all the drugs that are pouring in because we have no wall. But we are. We started building the wall, as you know. $1.6 billion, and we're going to keep that going. But a lot of these countries actually smile at me when I'm talking, and the smile is, we couldn't believe we got away with it. That's the smile. So it's going to change. It's going to change. They have no choice. If it's not going to change, we're not going to trade with them. Okay, how about a couple of more?